you will feel that way. I hope so.
There's some.
Start.
Thank you. Sorry. You were talking earlier about how this book, because it was fragments, it wasn't finished, it had that unfinished feel to it. And I think one of you mentioned, well, it's not, the narrative isn't complete. I don't see him as having any intention to write a complete linear narrative ever, except in his nonfiction. I know certainly Infinite Jest, I remember, I was just so immersed in it. And it was all over the place. And when I got to the last page, I had this, did I miss something? Do I have to read this book again? And I probably do. But so when I haven't finished The Pale King, but reading this, I don't find it to be surprising that it's structured the way it is. And I'm not expecting a complete close-the-loop novel.
In a weird way, it makes it kind of less stressful because you're not constantly having to try to figure out, is there a reason why this gap is here? And you can just let the parts be what they are.
And it has to be said, it's actually a surprisingly conventional book. I mean, when I finished Infinite Jest, I didn't say, did I miss something? I said, did I miss everything? But here, you're meeting people, you get their childhoods, and then you meet them when they're grown up, and then you see them working together. It's sort of surprising. There's a sort of bracingly 19th century feel about it almost.
Not in the structure,
Well, there's a gentleman named Greg Carlisle who Charles and I met in Tucson a couple of years ago, who wrote a really interesting and extremely wonky book about Infinite Jest called Elegant Symmetry. And I think he was one of the pioneers of the idea that the book's narrative is in the form of a parabolic arc. And yeah, no, and it actually holds up. And actually, shit. I don't think Gately and Hal ever actually meet in the book proper, but I think the book's real ending, which is somewhere in the middle, have Gately and Hal digging up James's head, right? Right. So that's the end. I mean, in a way. So, but Mr. Carlisle, whose book is a small press academic publication, but is highly recommended to anybody who wants to sort of, I won't say unlock, but further explore the weird secrets of the structure of Infinite Jest. It's very wonky.
If I may just add, when I finished Infinite Jest and I had that feeling, I did go back and I started reading from the beginning, and when I got to the graveyard scene, I felt, oh, this explains a lot, but there's no way in the world the reader can know the importance of that scene when he's reading it.
Well,
Except the title, right?
Well, one of the ideas.
Wow, how can you know?
Well, one of the ideas I think from that book is the title Infinite Jest, and the MacGuffin of an entertainment that's so encompassing and so compelling that you watch it until you die. And he wrote a book where plot-wise the plot burns away until you're so invested in just the goings on of different characters, and in the writing, that you don't really care, and you just keep reading, and you don't want it to end. That it itself has a mirror effect, and I think when I was talking about the idea of a structure evolving, I think that whatever he was going to do in terms of how this book was going to present itself, that those mechanisms had yet to be put in place and maybe fine-tuned and discovered the way in an organic evolutionary process where a writer discovers and learns more about their subject. That was kind of what I meant.
I'll never forget reading Infinite Jest and getting to a certain point and looking ahead and saying, oh, great, 20 pages of Don Gately driving to the supermarket. And I was really like, oh, this is going to be fucking awesome. 20 pages of Don Gately driving to the supermarket. I can't wait. And I meant it then, I mean it now. I mean, it's a fucking amazing bit, It's just...
One of the purposes of a plot in most novels is that that's one of the the main factors that creates that feeling of immersion that you have. As you follow the line of the plot, the book builds a world for you to enter into. And with Wallace's work, it was it was other things that created that sense, but you still have that feeling of immersion, so that you feel like now I feel as if I've been to that weird office in Peoria with the 1040 mosaic, 1044 mosaic.
Like I've been trapped in that car trying to find a parking space.
It's not narrative, it's a thematic whole.
It's my boss at Premiere described his writing as phenomenological, which I think was an interesting perception. He just said it. I don't, we didn't really.
There is,
then I said I gotta go.
and
I just thought I'd throw that out.
one thing that I do find interesting, and I do want to shoehorn into mention, is in Infinite Jest, the relationship between the brothers is also very warm, and that the idea of intimacy or attempts of intimacy and kind of these phone calls at 5 a.m. and even the disappointment between one brother and another, and and maybe probably the most emotionally gripping thing that he wrote was is Linden, the last pages of Linden, the conversations between Lady Bird Johnson and the narrator when both their spouses are in their last days. And in this book, one thing that's not there is that intimacy and that the emotional bonds between people, and it's very much isolating. And there's a review in Sunday's Times talks about him as an adolescent narrator, because he has these feelings of isolation and these feelings of loneliness, and that we all certainly have. And that's something, just because of some personal things. As I read this book, I was really aware of this missing, and maybe it was going to grow into that. And I think that that's something that when he was at his best, he dealt with. Even when he was also at his best in a different way, he also dealt with how alone we can be. And it's interesting because I think there were ways I would have liked this, even what I read, to go in some other directions where where it maybe would touch on it. The beautiful excerpt "Good People" that appeared in the New Yorker being a lovely example of that.
There are some cases in Jest too where there's a sort of endearing embarrassment about the intimacy, as when the mother addresses one of the kids as Finbar, and there's a footnote. It says, "Don't ask."
As long as I have the mic, I have one more question. He's famously challenging the reader. He demands the reader invest himself in order to get something out of the book. That's really part of the whole, I think, the point of Infinite Jest to a certain extent. In terms of the Pale King, and this is a real throwaway, is that one of the reasons that they decided to make the footnotes so small and in such a light half-tone gray? It's hard for me to read even with my glasses in the best light in my apartment.
Man, art directors hate footnotes, especially magazine art directors. And, when we published Big Red Sun and the way it was published, there was a bit of a falling out about certain of the way the profanity was handled. And Dave was really upset by that. And he didn't write for Premiere again. We remained friendly, but he was more than a little upset about the way the thing had been handled. And I didn't really help because I was in a real acting out sort of phase. Then I was like, oh, yeah, well, you guys suck and I'm going to quit and da-da-da-da-da. And Dave actually called me and said, you know what, I'm not going to write for you guys again, but don't quit because it's not worth losing your job over. But anyway, a couple of years later, these were legendary pieces at the magazine, and one of our art directors said, well, footnotes, that's a lot of bullshit. I'm glad he's not writing for us anymore because I wouldn't have stood for those footnotes. So he gets another job, right? He gets a job at Play, the New York Times sports magazine, first fucking issue, Dave's Roger Federer piece. I'm like, hey, Dirk, how you like those footnotes now, jerk off? And he's like, yeah, thanks.
Well, thank goodness the world wasn't deprived his art direction.
I think we're getting to the end of our allotted span. Is there one more question?
I guess not. How could we even answer it anyway?
So we're agreed.
What do we
Footnotes
know?
good, art director's bad.
Hey, thank you, everyone. You've been great, and thank you. Just for myself, I'd like to thank Lev and Laura, and I guess Glenn.
What is it? Thanks to you too, Charles.
And Marlena, and all
Yeah.
the people at the Strand.
Thank you for everybody at the
Ooh,
Strand and
yeah.
everybody here. Thank you.
Thanks very much.
Thank you all for coming tonight. They're going to stick around if you have any other questions, and feel free. We have all of his backlist and obviously Pale King. Thank you all for coming tonight.
And beautiful.